Hello and welcome to this edition of Represent NYC from Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm Ben Max, your host and the executive editor of Gotham Gazette. Today we're discussing the complicated situation involving the resignation of New York Lieutenant Governor Brian Benjamin, including Governor Kathy Hochul's expected decision to replace him in government and the election happening this year for both those positions at the top of New York State government, as well as many other elected offices. Those governor and lieutenant governor elections are separate in the party primaries, but the winners of those primaries then become tickets in the general election where voters can choose among the pairs put forward by the political parties on the ballot: the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, Conservative Party, Working Families Party, and so forth. For example, in 2018, the last statewide election cycle, Governor Andrew Cuomo and Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul each won their contested Democratic primaries and were therefore merged as a general election ticket. When voters cast their general election ballots, they could choose the pair of Cuomo and Hochul or the pairs put forward by other parties, such as the Republican ticket of Mark Molinaro and Julie Killian, among other pairs. Cuomo and Hochul were, of course, victorious. Fast forward to 2021, and then Governor Andrew Cuomo's resignation amid various scandals and a threat of impeachment, making Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul the governor. She was then able to choose a replacement in her old position and selected then State Senator of Manhattan, Brian Benjamin, as the new lieutenant governor. As the political calendar moved into 2022, Hochul and Benjamin undertook the process of running for their own terms in those new positions through this year's elections. And both were designated by the State Democratic Party for the June primary ballot, where they were each facing challengers. But on April 12th of this year, Lieutenant Governor Benjamin was arrested on federal corruption charges and resigned from his office that day, throwing into question his place on the primary ballot, creating an opening for Governor Hochul to fill in New York State government, and leaving her with some very big headaches in this election year. So as we speak here a couple of weeks later in late April 2022, what happens next? That's what we're discussing today with my three expert guests. In just a moment, my conversation on the lieutenant governor situation, mess, if you will, with Susan Lerner, the executive director of Common Cause New York, a government reform group, Camille Rivera, a partner at New Deal Strategies, a political consultancy, and Jon Campbell, a reporter covering New York State government and politics for WNYC Radio and Gothamist. Now, briefly, these elections for governor and lieutenant governor are part of the 2022 New York State elections. On the ballot this year are the statewide offices of governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and comptroller, as well as one of the state's two U.S. Senate seats and every seat in the state Senate, state assembly, and New York delegation to the U.S. House of Representatives. Party primaries are nearing. There's also some uncertainty about those dates based on a recent top New York court ruling about state redistricting efforts, and the general election will be this fall. It's an immensely important year for choosing the next roster of state government in New York, as well as many federal office holders. And all this drama and uncertainty doesn't help much, but we're here to help you break down at least some of it today in this episode. So today we're focused on this position of lieutenant governor, the state's second in command to the governor, helping to run state government and do the business of the people. The lieutenant governor has few defined responsibilities, but must be ready to become governor if the governor is no longer able or willing to serve. And we just saw that in 2021. And the lieutenant governor has the responsibility of presiding over the state Senate and typically takes on a certain role or portfolio, often at the discretion of the governor, and serves as a spokesperson for the gubernatorial administration. So will Brian Benjamin's name remain on the Democratic primary ballot for lieutenant governor? What will Governor Hochul do about replacing him in her government? And what else should we be thinking about in terms of the governance of New York State and the races for governor and lieutenant governor happening this year? Susan, Camille, Jon, welcome. Thank you for joining me. So let's dig in here. Jon, did I miss anything on the role of lieutenant governor? Is there anything else that viewers and voters and New Yorkers should be thinking about when we talk about this position? How do you characterize for people sort of the importance of Governor Hochul now having this big opening that she needs to consider appointing someone to her old post for the second time?
Well, it's certainly important in terms of chain of command and chain of succession, I should say. I mean, David Patterson, back when he was lieutenant governor, he used to joke that he would get up in the morning and call Eliot Spitzer, and as soon as he heard Eliot Spitzer, he would hang up the phone and know that his job was done for the day. But it is big in terms of that. It is the first in line to the governor's office, I should say. And right now it's vacant. But it is, it varies from administration to administration how much power the lieutenant governor has. There are not, as you said, many constitutional powers. But Kathy Hochul had brought Brian Benjamin more into the mix and had made her more of a part of her administration than perhaps she was with Andrew Cuomo, which ultimately worked in her favor, quite frankly. So it varies from governor to governor, but as far as constitutional responsibilities, the biggest thing is they're next in line to the governor's office.
Susan, there's a big question here about whether Brian Benjamin's name will remain on the ballot. The timing of all this created a really big mess. Can you capture for us sort of the decision at hand and the deliberations at hand? And if you and Common Cause, of course, have a certain perspective on that, and you can get into that as well, but there's some real tough questions at play here.
It's very fascinating. The indictment of Brian Benjamin that was announced by the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney was announced the day after the deadline for Brian Benjamin to withdraw from the ballot. What an interesting coincidence. That the U.S. attorney chose to wait until it was too late for him to withdraw from the ballot. Our arcane election law really locks a candidate in very early in the process in relation to election day. That's a mistake. Too frequently, we see the situation where the voters are presented with an inaccurate ballot. Our election law was written in the 19th century. It's all about the political parties, and that's a problem. This is yet another instance in which our election law is archaic and problematic in a contemporary sense, in that the only way in which a candidate can withdraw after the deadline is if they die, or to be removed from the ballot if they die, if they move out of state, or if they run for another office. That has resulted in really bizarre situations. A situation several years ago, actually 2 decades ago, with a conservative candidate for lieutenant governor. He ended up moving to Connecticut to get off the ballot. We've seen what happened with the Republican candidate, Chris Collins, for Congress in the Buffalo area. And now we have this problem with the Democratic lieutenant governor. It requires a legislative solution. There should be more flexibility when you have big life-changing events like being indicted or convicted, or frankly, being diagnosed with a life-threatening illness. And that is the bill that is pending in the Assembly, which would allow candidates to withdraw when those kind of life-changing events take place.
We'll come back to whether the timing on this is makes the movement of that bill potentially a good government move. But Camille, how do you capture the political headache here? You're a consultant. You deal with crises all the time. How do you sort of capture the political headache and crisis for Governor Hochul in this moment?
I think it's a real problem. She's between a rock and a hard space here. One, she's been cornered into these legal constrictions that doesn't allow her to make a choice, number one. Number two, constitutionally, you need to have a lieutenant governor, right? And for the last, I don't know, I mean, I've been in politics 22 years, but I even see before that, the LG and the governors run on the same slate, right? Because they want to have the same message. But I think from a political perspective, and I talked to a couple of people yesterday about this, I think it's a lot of chips for her right now to have to kind of figure out the lieutenant governor space. And it's really veering away from her race for governor. And, it was a very messy budget. The stadium deal is still kind of like, feeling really icky around people. And I don't think she should really be fighting so hard for this one. In my mind, you have 2 lieutenant governors that are running in, who have to petition, who have to fundraise on their own, who have to get on the ballot, who are on the ballot, that actually could serve that seat, right? Whether or not the governor is going to agree all the time with whatever there is, to Jon's point, There's not much that the LG can do besides be on the bully pulpit, be a messenger of some sort. Maybe there's a disagreement, but it's not much that this person can do. And I'm not sure that this is something that she should be fighting for. It's also very messy, and it's really veering away from the issues that really matter. You've got a couple months to the end of session. People want to get work done. Now you have redistricting, which is an entire mess right now that has the jeopardy of Senate races and the congressional maps. I mean, this is just too much at once. And I think New York State and its voters deserve better here. And we should just be focusing on the issues at hand. And that's kind of what I'm hearing.
And as you get at, there are two other Democratic candidates for lieutenant governor, or prominent, I should say, candidates for lieutenant governor on the Democratic side. Diana Reyna, who's running in an informal ticket with Tom Suozzi, who's running for governor, and Anna Maria Chilla, who's running in an informal ticket with Jumaane Williams, who's running for governor. So Democratic primary voters will have those choices and others on the primary ballot, no matter what happens with Brian Benjamin. Susan, in terms of this decision to potentially allow for the removal and replacement of Brian Benjamin on the Democratic primary ballot, is this not too much of a favor to do this for Governor Hochul at this juncture? There are some people, I've seen it mostly from the Republican side, who say, you know what, maybe a change in the law is needed, but we should be doing it for following elections, not for this current one, because it's too much of a bailout to a governor who should have seen some warning signs when she made this choice, because there were lots of investigations swirling around Brian Benjamin's fundraising. Is it not too much of a political favor to Kathy Hochul to do this ahead of the June primary?
Talking about political favors is kind of absurd in a situation where you have the voters who are going to be presented with an incorrect ballot. Let's talk about what's fair to the voters. If the voters are presented with an incorrect ballot, they are being invited basically to throw their vote away for lieutenant governor. That's simply not fair to the voters. How that plays out for the candidates, frankly, is irrelevant. It's got to be the voters first and foremost. And why would we ever permit an inaccurate ballot to be presented to the voters when we have time to change it?
I mean,
Jon,
I would just add to this,
go ahead.
just if I could just, I'm not going to disagree on Susan's argument about inaccurate ballots. I think that's important, but I will say something like, there is a political situation happening across New York State. You have two vetted Latinas that are running in New York State. Both of them qualified, both of them and their ability for her to then, from the politics, I get that space, and I'm not going to kind of delve into that space. I believe that that's very important to the voters, but there are two and other candidates that can be, lieutenant governor for the state of New York, right? And I also think that, why now create another opportunity for another candidate to be nominated? Here's an opportunity, right, where we could actually galvanize and move these two candidates into a space, right? It's not like the voters don't have a choice here, right?
Talk about trying to put your thumb on the scale. Let's say in one universe, Brian Benjamin ends up winning. Now, obviously the other two candidates don't think that's likely.
I don't know what you mean by thumb on the scale. That's not my point.
So then what you have is a situation where the Democratic Party gets to choose the replacement that will be the Democratic lieutenant governor candidate in November without any input by the voters. That possibility, I don't think, is fair to the voters either.
Let me come to Jon for a second. Jon, we have a situation here where the governor has to make a governmental choice and a political choice kind of at the same time, right? And one of the things I would imagine is that she doesn't want to necessarily name a new lieutenant governor to the government that won't be able to run with her then in this election. That creates a pretty tricky decision-making process as she is trying to lobby the legislature to allow for the replacement of Brian Benjamin on the primary ballot. What do you make of that landscape, and what's your sort of sense of the politics? And viewers should know that things are changing very fast all the time here in New York politics. So we're talking a couple of days before this first airs here in late April into May. Things could change quickly, but your sense of that sort of very delicate political landscape as the governor has to make a governmental decision about who's going to be the next lieutenant governor, but also wants to try to align that with the political landscape and who's going to potentially be on the ballot.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing there is if she can't get the legislature to approve something to get Brian Benjamin off the ballot and allow her to replace, or allow the Democratic Committee on Vacancies to replace a lieutenant governor candidate, then she's going to have to try to recruit a lieutenant governor for the last 7 months of this year. And that's going to be very difficult to find a placeholder, so to speak.
Exactly.
So the idea is she's trying to get this pushed through. Lawmakers so far have given it mixed reaction. The Assembly seems to be more amenable than the Senate, but things can happen all the time in Albany. The Senate will be in session this week. The legislature will be in session this week. We'll see if they play ball.
Look, I think the other piece here too, and just to assert myself, it's like the Democratic bosses, right? Like there's going to be some deal that's going to be made, right? Like that's politics. And I'm pretty positive that something will work through this. But the point is that with redistricting and with this, right, all of this should be handled together. You've got situations, whether or not we have a June or August primary, this is very disenfranchising to the voters of New York State at this point, right? Like people aren't even going to know who they're going to be voting for anyway. And the logistics of the nightmare that is BOE, right? Can you imagine what's happening now? They can't even get their stuff together when when they're following the deadlines.
All right, we don't want to dissuade people from voting though. So
I'm not dissuading people from voting. I'm saying that
all the more reason to solve the LG problem.
Just solve it and move forward. Like that's where I agree with Susan, right? Like
difficult,
figure it out and figure it out quickly.
Playing field.
Yeah.
Jon, what's your sense of the considerations that Governor Hochul is making with this choice? Let's just say, for the sake of argument, because I think Camille is probably very much onto something, that some sort of deal will probably be reached, but we'll see. I mean, the relationship between the governor and the legislature is tricky. State Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins has sort of indicated that she's very hesitant to make a change in the law that would impact the election that's, in some ways underway given the ballot situation. But let's sort of think that if a compromise is reached that allows her, what's your sense of the consideration she's going through? I'm sure that she and her team are trying to take a much more careful vetting approach, as she indicated she would. Any sense of the considerations that she's undertaking here in terms of naming this next lieutenant governor, who she hopes will be also her running mate of sorts?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you always have the consideration of diversity, both geographic diversity and racial and ethnic diversity. And that was something that she tried to accomplish with Brian Benjamin. Kathy Hochul is a white woman from Buffalo. Brian Benjamin is a Black man from Harlem. And it worked out well from multiple different political perspectives for Kathy Hochul. She will try to do that again in some form or fashion. There are no shortage of potential candidates out there. But again, it comes down to whether she can find a candidate who will get on the ballot in 2022. And she doesn't have that certainty at this point. So until we get that first part figured out, whether or not she will be able to get her own candidate on the ballot, I don't think we're going to hear much by way of names. I don't think we're going to hear much by way of serious candidates until that's figured out.
And Camille, say a little bit more about that, because as you got at, there's two Latinas in the race for lieutenant governor on the Democratic primary side. As I said in the opening, there's other parties doing their own thing, and that'll come to fruition in the general election. But there doesn't seem to be other competitive primaries for lieutenant governor. What do you think the governor should be thinking, sort of separate from, it's pretty clear that she's unlikely to want Diana Reyna or Ana Maria Archila as her lieutenant governor right now, as her running mate. They're linked up with gubernatorial candidates who are criticizing her, every day. So what's your sense of what she should be sort of considering in terms of the politics and the governance in terms of naming a lieutenant governor?
I get that the governor's in this very precarious situation, but this is a situation that is what it is, that could have been avoided and is no longer an option, right? And I think her dying on a vine on this doesn't make any sense. And then the political landscape is something to difficult. So separate the election law stuff, which I agree with. Let's just fix it. I don't really care. But the truth of the matter is that if we're thinking about the political landscape, Latinos are 30% of New York State at this point, and they do not have a statewide office. And yes, I am definitely putting my finger on the scale on this one, Susan. Like there is not a representation of Latinos in the state of New York. And here you have, and whether or not they are going to be ideologically aligned with the governor, right? At the end of the day, to Jon's point again, there's limits to the LG space, right? Yes, there are, God forbid she were to step down, they could be a number 2 into a number 1 space, but both of them have different ideologies, but pretty much are not too far apart of where the governor is. Diana Reyes is a conservative Democrat. You can tell even with her endorsements, not something that I necessarily agree with, obviously, but she is somebody that could match up to that. And Ana Maria Arquila is a brilliant, advocate who can actually probably bridge the gap where she is actually really hurting, right? Because it is a Democratic primary and she does need these votes in the Democratic Party, and she needs to excite the base in the general election, as you can see to the polls. So I just feel like it's just something that she's dying on a vine on, where she actually needs to campaign for governor.
Susan, would it be better government for New York for Governor Hochul to select someone as her lieutenant governor to finish out this term who is not going to be on the ballot with her? Would that be better, or is that more confusing for voters?
That is actually more confusing for voters. And the entire situation, to me, underlines yet again how out of date our election law and our constitutional system is, because of what Camille was pointing out. We have this strange situation where you can have a mismatched governor and lieutenant governor. I mean, we could have a Republican lieutenant governor and a Democratic governor. We've seen how that's played out in other states. It's been a nightmare where the governor is afraid to leave the state because of what the lieutenant governor might try to do that's contradictory. We should have a wholesale redo of our election law to bring it up to the necessary standard. And yes, I do think from a good governance point of view that there should be a ticket that runs that is aligned, so that when you vote for a governor, the person who might replace them, it's happened twice in the last 2 decades, is actually ideologically aligned.
Jon, what's your sense of the playing field in the lieutenant governor primary right now? Brian Benjamin obviously not campaigning, could still wind up being on the ballot. In some universe, could wind up winning, as has been discussed here. But then there are these 2 other prominent candidates that we've been discussing. Diana Reyes, former city council member, former deputy Brooklyn Borough president under Mayor Eric Adams, who is aligned with Tom Suozzi running for governor. Ana Maria Arquila, who is a longtime progressive advocate and activist, running alongside Jumaane Williams, who's running for governor. What's your sense of the sort of playing field and how a potential Hochul choice could sort of land in that playing field?
Yeah, I mean, it's a total wild card, quite frankly. I mean, these aren't names that the normal New Yorker knows, the everyday New Yorker knows. Now, if there is a competitive lieutenant governor primary, I mean, then you will get to know some of these names. But as of right now, I mean, it's not like there's a lot of lieutenant governor race polling or anything like that. It's difficult to kind of game out who's ahead, who's behind. But we do know this, with Brian Benjamin on the ballot, it throws the whole thing into disarray, in the sense that he has suspended his campaign. He is not actively running, but if his name's still on the ballot, he'll still catch some votes. And like I said, total wild card. We don't know which way that's going to go. And that is something that, Kathy Hochul, that's why she's pushing for this, is because, she wants to guard against that uncertainty of who wins. And generally, and it's been different in the past, but generally, the governor candidate who wins, their preferred lieutenant governor candidate also does well or wins, and that's what she's hoping for here.
And Jon, do you have any sense if Governor Hochul would prefer Diana Reyes or Ana Maria Arquila? I think there's different ways in which you can make an argument either way. Any sort of political analysis there on what you think she might prefer if she had to, sort of choose one of the 2?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the early days after Brian Benjamin's arrest and resignation, there was some chatter, well, maybe she'll try to poach Diana Reyes from Tom Suozzi's campaign. And I think that really wasn't based on anything more than maybe they're a little more ideologically aligned. Kathy Hochul is generally regarded as a moderate Democrat. The same thing with Diana Reyes, or at least more in the middle than perhaps Ana Maria Arquila is. So I think in general, the common sense suggests that, but they both Diana Reyna has made clear, she's with Tom Suozzi. So there doesn't seem to be an opportunity to jump here.
And Camille, zoom out for a minute even further. This is now going to be discussed in the general election, no matter what. No matter what happens here, there will be discussion. It's already happening about Governor Hochul's choice. And even if Governor Hochul doesn't win the primary for governor, there'll be talk from the Republican side about the messes on the Democratic side and how they had a lieutenant governor who had to resign. How much does all of this wind up hurting, whether it's Governor Hochul or somebody else on the Democratic side in the general election? Is this going to matter when we come through in terms of the sort of specter here of a lieutenant governor who was in office for a very brief time and then resigned under corruption charges?
I mean, if I'm the Republicans, I definitely make hay of this, right? I turn it into a fire of incompetence for the Democratic Party. But to Susan's point, I mean, unfortunately, we have not dealt with the issues of voter rights and election law in New York State. And we've had a majority in the Democrats to do that. And we haven't done it. And we've made our own mess here. And so shame on us for not figuring this stuff out so that they can use it against us long term and be able to build a majority that will help New Yorkers across the state. I don't know if, hindsight's all 2020, but I don't think that it rises to the level of truly hurting, but it is going to be part of a narrative that the Democrats had a majority, that they have not been able to get out of their own, right, and figure out a way forward. And it is going to attach the stadiums, all this other stuff, and all these transparents, the corruption, not understanding that Benjamin was someone that we should have vetted. If I'm the Republicans, this is what I'm working on right now.
Susan, we're under a minute left here, so I'll give you a final thought here on what comes next, and then we'll have to say goodbye.
I think what comes next is let's put the voters first. Let's give them meaningful choices.
All right, that was very fast. Jon, do you have a final thought on what this all means for the general election?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it is what it is. I mean, the lieutenant governor position is one that doesn't matter until it matters, and right now it matters. So, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in November.
And obviously, to the root of my question about how much it matters in the general election will, of course, matter who the Democratic ticket winds up being. If Governor Hochul is in the general election, then this stuff will still continue to haunt some. If it's not her because she's not successful in the primary, then it'll obviously hurt Democrats less because it wasn't one of the others' decisions to nominate Brian Benjamin to lieutenant governor. All right, Susan Lerner, Camille Rivera, and Jon Campbell, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. And thank you for watching Represent NYC from Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Make sure you're ready to vote in the upcoming party primaries. If you're eligible, there's still time to register to vote, but the window to switch your party affiliation has closed, and everybody should be getting ready, of course, to also vote in the fall general election. I'm Ben Max from Gotham Gazette. See you soon.